appreciate people tuning in today, talk about the BEAD challenge process. I'm going to kind of create a context around the BEAD challenge process because it is a fairly complex topic. So bear with me as we go through some of the kind of surrounding information that'll help you understand the BEAD challenge process. So I'm in rainy and cold Athens, Ohio today, and we've been doing speed test-based mapping in Ohio for quite a while. As you see, we kind of create our own speed tiers. Dark red is the worst, dark green is the best. And this is based on Ookla speed test intelligence data, over 14 million tests that we have in the state of Ohio. We've been doing this in other states as well, but we have the biggest depth, the longest history in Ohio. Unfortunately, this is what the ISPs claim is the situation in Ohio. Same color scheme, we just used the FCC data and formatted it in those color schemes. So if you're planning challenges, well, it's a pretty big set of challenges to do. When we take out the fixed wireless claims, the picture improves. There's still a lot of overstatement, but you can see you start seeing some of those unserved areas when we take out the fixed wireless claims. So in general, as we look at this, we recommend focusing on the areas that are below 5010. Those are the areas in the red and the orange. The yellow areas, a lot of those are cable modem services where they provide adequate download speeds, but their upload speeds don't meet the 20 megabit per second threshold. There's some ISP myths about the value of speed tests. And one of them is, well, the area looks bad because nobody in that area will subscribe to higher speeds. And as you'll see later, we can clearly disprove that. And in areas where rural electric cooperatives are deployed, between a quarter and a third of the people will take the top speed offered to them. Another is the bad speed test because of bad Wi-Fi. This is also just onerously incorrect, that even a first generation Wi-Fi router will completely saturate a 10.1 connection. So when we see areas that have no broadband at all, that even meet the 10.1 threshold, it's clear it's not because of a bad Wi-Fi signal. But also we throw out records that have high signal to noise ratio, which we see in that speed test data. And then the third myth that you'll hear a lot is, well, the speed tests, it just reflects when people have a problem. So they run a speed test, it shows their service is bad, and that's what we're seeing in these maps. That's also not true. What we use is the maximum speeds, because I think like you go run a speed test when you have a network problem. But then once you think it's fixed, you run a speed test over and over a few times to make sure that it's actually working correctly. And in any given location, we just bubble up to the top the fastest speed test we've ever seen in that location. So when we look at an area of Ohio, this is in Guernsey County. And as I said, we go back pretty far in time. So we've got records, speed test records from back in 2020 and 2021. And you'll see this is kind of location level information using the Ookla data, same color scheme. You'll see that in these areas around the rural areas around this little town of Byesville is really bad service. Byesville itself, you see a little bit better service, but still a pretty grim picture. But it was awarded to Charter in RDOF. And now in 2022, the picture changed dramatically. So you'll see a lot more speed tests, areas over here that were completely vacant. Now you see there really are people there, and they really will subscribe to broadband when it's made available to them. And to get a green dot from Charter, you're spending $100 a month. So people are spending a significant amount of money to get that speed, have that green dot. And you're never going to see all green dots. It's always going to be a mix of colors. But you can see a significant change between the before and after based on that RDOF implementation. So it's clear speed tests can identify unserved areas, and it's clear that we can identify progress. So it really helps, again, defeat those myths. So if you'll accept for a second that the crowdsourced speed tests will give you concrete availability information and can track changes over time for accountability. We base that on this preponderance of evidence, millions and millions of speed tests. We can statistically analyze that to have valid results. So we think it was really important to consider these because it helps us reverse the burden of proof. Instead of the FCC process is tell us what you offer in this area, and there's no verification at all. It's just, okay, that must be there because the ISP said it is. So we feel the speed tests give you the ability to kind of reverse that burden and say, no, the ISPs have to prove what they've done. And there was a lot of groundswell of support for this position. We're by far not the only people doing speed test-based analysis. Some people use Ookla, some people use other sources of that speed test data, but it's become a pretty common approach and was gaining a lot of traction. And then in the last few months, things really changed. I use this from Gaslight. You listen here, the FCC maps are correct. Suddenly there's this chorus of voices that the FCC maps are correct. Big celebration that there was a 13% reduction in unserved on the maps. We still don't think the FCC maps are right. We believe they're understating the problem by about half. So the only explanation that we've had for this dramatic change in the environment is that people have realized that they don't have enough money, that the BEAD program isn't big enough to solve all of the problems. So let's use the FCC maps because it makes the problem half the size that it really is. So now we kind of jump into, okay, so what do we do? How do we try to protect areas that we know don't have service regardless of what it says in FCC maps? So for the BEAD program, that's the BEAD challenge process. So to understand the challenge process, it's important to understand the timeline a little bit. So unfortunately, the timeline is going to go out pretty far. FCC updates availability information every 6 months. And then the state has to create the initial proposal. Most states are in that process now. Some have completed that process. Then it has to be reviewed by NTIA. And it's unclear how long that process will take because we don't have much of a track record yet about what it's going to take once they've submitted that. Then the state has to create their final proposal. And then again, NTIA has to review it. And then finally, we'll be into deployment monitoring. Now, one of the things that a lot of people have heard is that once the NTIA has approved the initial plan, that you're going to be able to, the state can get 20% of the money and start spending it. I've heard from a couple of state broadband leaders that that's going to be problematic based on the rules, that probably the only activities that will be happening would be things like environmental assessment, historical preservation assessment, rather than actual deployment with that first tranche of funding. And this timeline is variable. Yeah, I've given little blocks of time here, but it's variable. It's going to be state by state. How fast did the state broadband office create their initial proposal? How long does it take NTIA to review it? So all of these timelines that you see here can shift. And you really need to try to stay in touch with what's happening at your state broadband office. And just give you a sense of the pressure on the state broadband offices. Okay, state broadband offices are in tremendous pressure because by the time they submit their final proposal, the goal that they're supposed to achieve is that they have issued grants that will cover every single unserved and underserved location in their state. It's a big lift to meet that goal, but that's the NTIA expectation of the states. So the state initial proposal, most states are still in this process, somewhere in this process. It starts with volume 1. And in my mind, the big point of volume 1 is how is the state going to determine eligibility? So they have to write the draft, they have to go to public comment. Based on the public comment, they have to revise that and then submit it to NTIA. Then there is, from what I'm hearing, a fair bit of dialogue back and forth with NTIA to help shape those volume 1 requirements for determining eligibility. So when does it all come out? Again, it's going to vary from state to state. We don't know how long NTIA is going to take in the reviews, and the states are in different stages of public comment, revise and submit, and so forth. The other key part of that initial proposal is volume 2. And there's a lot of things in both volume 1 and volume 2 that I'm not going to touch on. I'm just going to explain to you what I think are the most important issues. So volume 1, how are we going to determine who's eligible for funding? Volume 2 is how are we going to run our grant processes? What's the scoring matrix? How do ISPs qualify? So that's what's happening in volume 2 of most importance. So again, same process, write the draft, public comment, revise and submit, negotiate, and then NTI will approve the initial proposal. So that's all initial proposal. The pre-challenge modifications, if your initial proposals are out for public comment, I really encourage you to participate in the comment process, because this is a really key point. The 30-day comment period is required, and it's requirement 7 in volume 1, where they talk about what they'll do. The pre-challenge modifications is they get the FCC data, they do whatever they say they're going to do in volume 1, and then that's the list of eligible locations that goes out to the challenge. So we think it's a great place where states can reverse the burden of proof. And again, it's used for determining the locations eligible for BEAD funding and then put into the challenge process. So that final proposal timeline, so the NTIA kicks off when the NTIA has approved the initial proposal, and they have a year to move forward with that state final proposal, which again has to be reviewed by the NTIA. So pre-challenge modifications, things they described in volume 1, first thing that's going to happen is pre-challenge modifications. Then the challenge window opens, challenge process commences. And how they're going to do the challenge process is also in volume 1. And then they've got to do their grant program. And different states have come up with different creative ways to manage that grant process. You basically just need to read the volume 2 in your state to see what they're proposing. Then there'll be a 30-day public comment period, revise and submit, negotiate, and then again, when does NTI approve it? We don't think any of those are likely to come out before 2025. Maybe Louisiana, because Louisiana somehow has been way ahead of the game. But most states will probably be at some point in 2025 that the final proposal comes out. So 1-year allowance, the challenge window timing again, I've showed these kind of lined up in time, but it can vary a lot. And there's really tremendous pressure on these state broadband offices because they've got that 1-year window. In that 1-year window, they have to do the entire grant process. And so they want to get the challenges out of the way as soon as possible in that 1-year window so that they have more time for the grant process. So one of the ways this could go too, when you look at what your state is proposing, they might not have any pre-challenge modifications. And there are a number of states that are just saying, we'll take whatever the FCC map says. So if you're in one of those states, that challenge process is going to happen sooner. It's going to happen pretty quickly after NTIA approves the initial proposal. And the reason a state would want to do that is it gives them more time in the grant making process. So the eligible locations is a really critical issue. So the first, before pre-challenge modifications, it's just whatever the FCC map says is eligible for funding. So that's where they start. They run the pre-challenge modifications. So for instance, state of Ohio and several other states say that they will downgrade DSL. So if you've got a DSL provider that's claiming they can do 100 by 20, they'll go, I don't think so, and downgrade it to underserved. So that's one of the examples of a pre-challenge modification is the DSL downgrades, most popular that I've seen so far. So that would be a bigger list of locations that are eligible. Then they've got the challenge process. And at the end of the challenge process, that's your final list of eligible locations for the entirety of the BEAD program. It'll probably impact Reconnect. If there's another round of Reconnect, it'll impact any other federal programs. States may or may not adhere to that, but it's going to be a really important list that you get to after the challenge process. So the challenge process itself, there's going to be a challenge window. And again, I'm showing that at a point in time that it's going to be sliding. It's going to vary from state to state. You just have to try to stay in touch with your broadband office, read the volume 1, read the volume 2, so you understand when that's likely to happen. So most states are accepting what's called the NTIA BEAD model challenge process. And I've got a link at the end of this to clue you into where to read that document. So a little more detail on that challenge window itself. There's the challenge period, which will last 30 days. You can submit speed test data as part of that challenge process, and you get 60 days retrospective. So you get 90 days of speed test data that you can work with. Then there's a 30-day rebuttal period where ISPs are going to say, no, we offer services there. We're going to offer services there soon, whatever their rebuttal is. And then 30 days for the state to adjudicate it, to look at the challenges, look at the rebuttals, and make their decision about whether to support or reject the challenge. So again, just want to remind everybody, the start date of this is going to vary by state, and it's in your initial proposal, and it is the NTI BEAD model challenge process that most states are using. I haven't seen anybody yet say that they're going to do something other than the BEAD model challenge process. So you'd think this would probably be challenging citizens to the state broadband office, but that's not the way this works. So the BEAD model challenge process does not allow the citizens to submit those challenges directly to the state. I don't know why they did it that way. State of Missouri has proposed to allow challenging citizens to submit directly to their state broadband office. I don't know if NTI is going to approve that or not, but it's kind of disappointing that it's this way, because what has to happen is there needs to be a nonprofit, a unit of government, or a tribal government that receives those and then submits them. So that kind of aggregating entity has to coordinate the process, has to collect the data, and then submit it to the state broadband office. So this is a pretty heavy lift, and I'm really hoping that people will at least agree. There's no funding to support this activity by the nonprofit or the unit of government. It's out of your goodness of your hearts. So I'm hoping people will at least agree to be the point where they can collect it and submit it, even if they don't have time to try to coordinate the challenge process. And I know there's a lot of broadband fatigue out there. We've been fighting this fight for a long time, largely with little or no funding, but it's an important fight to continue. So I hope folks will kind of get another cup of coffee, or however you can energize yourself for one more push of trying to get locations eligible. So just to really simplify things, there's, I don't know how many is that, a dozen types of challenges. So a lot of potential challenges. So you can challenge availability, speed, latency, data cap, that the technology that's claimed is not there, that the service that's there is only for businesses. And then you get into things the ISPs care about, enforceable commitment, that the area is showing is eligible for funding, but there's already a commitment there to serve it, that they plan on serving it in the next year, that the location is included in a grant area, but it shouldn't be. And then we've got a couple about CAIs. So I'm going to focus on these three: availability, speed, and latency. I think they're the most likely to bear fruit. So availability is basically saying, look, they say the service is there, the service isn't there. And so you have to submit evidence of that. So it could be a screenshot of a provider webpage where you entered your address and it says, no, service isn't there. It can be an email or a letter from a provider saying, no, we won't serve that address. This is a vague one: proof that claimed infrastructure is not near. Now, I'm not quite sure how you're going to do that. Go take pictures on the telephone pole showing there's no fiber. Well, then they can say it's underground. So that one's a tough one. Or an email or letter from the provider saying that they can't install it in a timely manner. And then the rebuttal, the ISP can say, oh no, look, that household already subscribes to the service. An alternative screenshot showing from their own web page showing that they do offer it. To me, this is the slipperiest one. So you go and say, I want it at 1162 Main Street, and it comes back saying service not available. So you challenge it. They change their web page, take a snapshot of it, and say, oh, no, see, the service is available there. That's a pretty slippery one. And then, or just claim that the service is available and show that you have an offer out to the customer. The more likely ones to bear fruit in my mind are the speed and latency challenges, and I include them together because they're very similar in terms of the evidence that required. But this is an important point here. If you're doing speed challenges, well, I'll get to that in a second. So speed and latency. Evidence required for this. First, you have to have a copy of your ISP invoice showing your name, address, and subscription package. So this is to show that you really are subscribing to a service and that the speed you're subscribing to is higher than what you're getting. So, for instance, if you've got a package that says it's 200 megabits by 50 megabits, but you never get to 100 by 20, you would be challenging on that basis. So this is a tricky one, is make sure that you get a copy of that invoice. This is from each residential subscriber that wants to do a challenge. And then you need screenshots of speed tests, 3 separate speed tests on 3 separate days. The screenshot needs to include the date and time and the provider IP address. And you're supposed to take that speed test directly from the residential gateway or having your wireless device really close to that residential gateway. So a pretty tough bar there as well. And then rebuttal options. ISP shows their own speed tests that demonstrates 80% of the threshold. Okay, this 80% of the threshold, this is another area I'm really disappointed that NTIA adopted this. This came out of the FCC of saying, well, yeah, we say it's 100 by 20, but if it's a B minus, it still counts. So if you subscribe to 100 by 20 and you get 80 by 16, well, that counts as 100 by 20 in FCC and now NTIA math. 25.3, it gets downgraded to 20 by 2.4. So I find this very unhelpful. There are a number of state broadband programs that have rejected this. They've said, no, if you say that you offer 100 by 20, the speed tests have to show 100 by 20. So it's really disappointing, again, that NTIA picked up this FCC 80% threshold. So there's 2 challenges I think are going to be the best way to go. Area challenges, where you can challenge an entire census block group. And I think this can be the most efficient use of people's time, that you need at least 6 challenging households in that block group. And they must all be the same type of challenge. You can't do 3 speed and 3 latency. It has to be 6 speeds or 6 latencies. I would suggest trying to get 10 households just to make sure. And then there's MDU challenges. So MDUs, my practice primarily focuses on rural areas, but urban areas have big issues as well, primarily in MDUs, where a carrier saying, hey, we have gigabit to the curb. It's not our problem if it's not getting into the building. So you can do MDU challenges to make that MDU multi-dwelling unit accessible for funding. And it's 1 unit if there's less than 15, 2 units if there's 16 to 24, and 3 units if it's 25 or larger. Again, I'd suggest doubling those numbers if you can, going to 2, 4, and 6. And again, it has to be the same type of challenge. If you're doing availability or speed challenge, it's speed challenge for all of them against the same ISP. So those are the two that I'm recommending you consider, are the area challenges and the MDU challenges. So looking at the Ohio map again, one of the first things you'd want to do in figuring out where you want to focus is to say, well, okay, what's already funded? So these blackout areas that I show you in Ohio here are areas that have been funded through RDOF, been funded through state grant programs. I think that's only two in Ohio. I don't think we've gotten any reconnect in Ohio. But that'll show you, okay, we just no need to worry about those areas that are unserved, because even if the person's not going to ever deploy it, we can't get funding for it. So those are just off the map for right now. So I look at my county, Athens County, and yeah, it's pretty poorly served. The town itself, this is the town of Athens here in the center. It looks pretty good, but everything else, a few blotches of green in areas, but the rest of it's in pretty high level of need for broadband. So you pull up Athens County in the FCC map. I don't know about you, but I don't find these hexagons very useful. It's very vague, and you have to drill down pretty far before you see actual locations. So what we do is we take that FCC data and process it our own way so that we can compare the speed tier claims. So we just take the FCC data and say, okay, if the speeds they're claiming are true, what's the top speed being provided by someone according to the FCC maps? And we just use the same color code so we can compare them side by side. This is what we think is reality. This is what the FCC thinks is reality. And this is the reality on this side is based on all technologies. So when we drop out all of the wireless, so now we're looking at the same map, but it's just the wired service claims. You'll see that it's a little closer to reality, but still pretty far off. So the next thing we like to do with the FCC, black out the areas that are funded. So a significant amount of area is funded. Then what we like to do is take the FCC data and look at what's the top wired provider technology. The person who has the top speed, what technology are they claiming to offer? So you'll see the green is DSL, the blue is cable modem, and the red is fiber to the home. And we're quite convinced a lot of fiber to the home is overstated. A lot of cable modems overstated as well. But this helps because you can go back to the state's initial proposal and say, well, did they take the DSL downgrade as an example? And in Ohio, they took the module, the NTIA offered this module, you can decide to do DSL downgrades. So Ohio said yes, so you can then project onto your map how that might change your picture. So now I've done all the DSL downgrades. So the yellow area now becomes eligible for service, regardless of what the carrier is claiming in that area. So we'll go switch back to this wired only version with the blackout areas that you can see here. Now you can start going, well, how am I going to target areas? So you need to prioritize. You can't just challenge everything. You need to prioritize. And so I just picked this Panhandle area. I know it pretty well. There's about 4,000 residents up there, 4,000 households up there that are going to be eliminated from BEAD because of claims of service that just aren't true. And if you don't have speed map information, we did this in Ohio, we've done it in several other states, but if you don't have speed test information, local knowledge is probably got the same information. Everybody knows this Panhandle area in our area, everybody knows that Panhandle area is poorly served. So you probably have local knowledge that can help you target these areas that you want to challenge. So we go into that Panhandle. Now you need to find the census block groups. So these numbers that you see here, those are the census block group numbers. I know it's really getting down in the weeds here. But this is what you have to do if you want to do an area challenge, which again, I think is easier than trying to do individual by individual challenges. So you can see there's a pretty big census block group here, a very deep red census block group here, another area here that's kind of mixed. So you want to then try to find people who live in that census block group. This is really where it's helpful to have kind of local advocates that understand the area and would feel comfortable canvassing. You don't really have enough time to try to do some campaign, email and social media. You're probably going to have to actually be knocking on doors. So now what I've added in here are the address points that we know of in those census block groups. So you start getting an idea of how you would do this, trying to collect 6 homes. Here's a nice cluster of homes in that census block group. So you don't have to cover the whole census block group with canvassing. You can target clusters of homes, go to those and try to get, again, 6 is the minimum. I'd shoot for 10 or 12. Again, another cluster of homes over here. So places that you can target that you can hopefully, without too much difficulty, get people to agree to participate in this process. So I'm showing you E911 addresses from Athens County because at this level of resolution, I'm not allowed to show you the fabric. So if you don't have a license to the fabric, you can't be shown the fabric except at really very small scale. So I'd have to zoom way in before I could show you fabric points. So it is going to be really helpful if you get a license to the fabric, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So when we talk about this fabric, what is it? Demystify that a little bit. It's just a CSV table, and you'll have location ID and address. You'll have building type and how many units are in that building. So if it's a duplex, that should be a 2. Oh, you've got a duplex there at the bottom is a 2. So if it's an MDU, you'll see there's the 2. If it's an MDU, it might show 30 in that. So single location, 30 units in that location. And then you get the latitude and longitude of the location. So it's the address you submit to the state broadband office has to be exactly the same as the fabric. I bring this up because when we participated with several clients in the first round of Ohio's residential broadband expansion grant program. It was state funded, happened last year, and they did a great job with it. We submitted the addresses as we knew them, and that's when I had the big wake up call that, wow, there's a lot of discrepancy in what we think an address is in the country. And I thought it was much more consistent than it is. So you need to use this address, not your E911 addresses. You need to find this particular address that's in the fabric, or your challenge is likely to just be rejected out of hand. So suggest you get a Tier 4 license. If not, you'll have to verify against the FCC map directly. So this is part of that panhandle area. In the FCC map, you can click on any of these and get the address. So it is possible to do all of this without the fabric. It's just easier with the fabric, but you can target an area and say, okay, we're going to target this area here. And you can click on each of them and get the address for it. So this FCC map, it's important to consult this before you go canvassing people, because here, these green dots are all areas that somebody claims they offer speeds above the 100 by 20 threshold. But you also have some red circles in here. The red circles are where nobody's claiming they offer speeds at that capacity. So you don't want to accidentally go down here, canvass those people, get them all to participate, and then go back to FCC map and realize, well, no one was claiming they served them anyway. So you need to pay attention. You want to challenge the green dots. And this is this little box here is where you will do manipulation to figure out, like in this case, I look for residential cable fiber, 120 megabits or greater. And this is a little trick here too. Data as of June 30, 2023, last updated November 28th, 2023. So I'm still not real clear on how frequently the FCC map shifts, but it shifts a lot more frequently than the 6-month releases that you would find. And then you see your list of providers here who are claiming services. So Connect Holding, that's one of the old telcos. Hughes Network, Nelsonville TV Cables, the one saying they do 200 by 20. Space Exploration, so SpaceX satellite services. But you don't have to worry about SpaceX. It would just be the terrestrial providers as you go to challenge. So if you decide to challenge in this area, say Nelsonville TV Cable, all your challenges would be toward Nelsonville TV Cable. You then might decide to challenge somebody else. But if you decide to challenge somebody, you have to do at least 6 challenges in that block group for that carrier for either speed or latency. And when you click on this, this is where you get to manipulate what you see in the results. So when you click on it, this is what you see. You can pick business or residential. Obviously, we're talking about residential. You can say any technology, which can be a little misleading, all wired, all terrestrial. So all wired and licensed fixed wireless, cable and fiber. So you can just pick, and you can also pick the speed threshold. And it's a good idea just to play with this and see how it affects the area that you're looking at. So you make sure you understand that you're challenging what you intended to challenge. So it is a big lift, the BEAD challenge process, state by state rules. And there's the unfunded consumer advocates, all of us, who have to gather and submit the data, and the ISPs who then get to rebut it. Again, I think the area challenges of census block groups are your best option. And just to reiterate, you need 6 or more households in a block group. And no point in challenging a block group that's going to get downgraded by your state anyway. So go back and look at volume 1, see what your state has proposed to do. And it's important and it doesn't take too long to go ahead and license the fabric for your county or region. It's called a Tier 4 license, pretty simple steps. You have to establish yourself in the FCC core system with a registration number. So if you haven't already done this, it's really simple. It's just a matter of minutes. You have your FRN and your core's identity. You then use that core's identity to go log into a different system, the FCC Broadband Data Collection System, same credentials, different system, and you'll be able to log in there. And then you go to CostQuest to complete your Tier 4 licensing request. So down in the link here is a lot of information about how to access that information. So to me, it's really a fight for our future. And again, I focus mostly on rural areas. What do we want rural America to look like in 20 years? We're already losing population. And so we could just be untapped and hollowed out. But I think there's a lot of people that would like to live in these small towns and rural areas. So with broadband, that becomes possible. So we become vibrant, engaged, and productive. Productivity goes up, average household income goes up, and increased tax revenues. Okay, and these are well proven from a lot of economic studies that when you bring broadband into an area that doesn't have any broadband, it improves productivity, household income, and increases tax revenues. And actually, it's a one-time subsidy in most areas, and just the increased tax revenues will pay off that subsidy in 7 years or less. So it's kind of a slam dunk to expand broadband, one of the better investments possible in infrastructure. So here's some useful links: the BEAD challenge process policy and its detail, the initial proposal progress dashboard. This will show you where your state is in the process. And then, of course, the FCC broadband map that we reviewed a little bit as well. So I can open it up for questions at this point. Sarah, we got any questions?
Hey, Tom,
Happy
thanks
to.
for that. Let's remove your pin. And hi, everyone. I'm Sarah with Connect Humanity, in case you joined late. We do have quite a few questions, and we just want to remind folks that you did do a webinar on this fabric licensing, and I put the link there in the chat. Take a look at that. So I'm going to try to prioritize these, but we have quite a few questions. Let's start here. Is there a good repository of all the states' timelines? When do the challenge process open and close?
Yeah, going to that link that I shared of the NTIA dashboard, your best place to go. And then if your state broadband office, they almost all of them do, state broadband offices will have an email sign up to get news from the state broadband office. I would suggest signing up for that as well. But unfortunately, it's pretty open-ended at this point when things are going to happen, and it's going to vary state to state. So I'd start on that NTA dashboard, drill down on your state, and see what they've said in Volume 1, where they are in the process. Every state has to submit supposedly, December 27th is the deadline for submitting their initial proposals to NTIA. I don't know if everybody's going to make that. I'm not sure how NTIA deals with it if they don't. But the initial proposals are supposed to be done December 27th. How long it takes NTIA to review those, I thought it'd be pretty quick. But hearing from state broadband leaders, there's a lot of back and forth with NTIA on the terms and conditions of their initial proposal. So, yeah, unfortunately, I wish we could lay it out and say, this is when you need to be prepared. It's like that 60-day window where you can take speed tests. Well, you can't really say when that is because you don't know when the challenge window is going to open. So yeah, it's a pretty complicated situation, unfortunately.
We have two questions about internet bills here. I'm going to ask them together. Is a copy of an internet bill still required for area challenges? And is a customer's bill the same as an invoice? If not, how do customers get the invoice?
Yeah, it would be whatever your carrier sends you. You know, you might be e-billing, but you should still be getting a copy of that, or can retrieve a copy of it. It is required for the area challenges. You do still have to have a copy of it. Now, NTIA is requiring that all personal identifiable information be redacted from public release. So what you give the nonprofit or unit of government as a subscriber will have all that personal identifiable information in it. The PII will not be redacted on what you give to the state, but the state is not supposed to release any of that information to the public. So it is kind of a high level of trust that you need the people who are working with you to do these challenges to trust you, that you are being a good use, making a good use of the data.
We have a few questions about the speed test data. One is, where is it from? And also, if you could talk about your sources and any others that you might suggest people to use or not use.
Yeah, there are a number of speed tests that are acceptable to NTIA. UCLA is one of them. MLab is another. There's a list in their BEAD model challenge process at the end of what speed tests are acceptable. Some of the names I didn't even recognize. So they're pretty broad in terms of accepting different types of speed tests, but it does have to be a screenshot at the time that they take that speed test of the speed test results.
We have some fabric licensing questions, so I'm going to ask a few of them. Someone was denied on a T4. Do they try again? And also, if you have a D license, can we get the address level data from CostQuest or the FCC?
Yeah, the D license is another option. I hadn't thought about that one. The NTIA has a licensing regimen as well. And it seems like CostQuest recently has become a lot tougher about who they approve. And I don't understand it because to me, the Tier 4 licenses should be any research group, government entity, nonprofit should be able to get that. But they've been pushing a lot of people toward the NTIA D license. So whatever I'd take the path of least resistance. You will get the same information from the NTIA license. And if they're trying to push you that direction, it's probably better to not try to fight CostQuest, especially given the short time we have to try to pull all this information together.
What level of technical skill do you recommend someone having to do an area challenge?
It's not a lot of technical skill. You do need some GIS help to be able to identify those census block groups so that you know, okay, here's the boundary of the census block group. And so I need to find addresses within that census block group to make that challenge. So you do need enough GIS capability for that. It's a pretty low bar. The census block group information is available from directly from AGOL, ArcGIS. It's a lot of sources that you can get that census block group layer and put it on top of your GIS so you can see where those census block groups are. Then if you have the fabric, you can lay the fabric points in there. So you do need some GIS expertise. Most of it's going to be on the ground, though, getting residents to participate, collecting that data, and submitting it to the state's portal.
You were earlier talking about prioritization of certain geographic areas. Are there certain census blocks that should be prioritized in a community depending on the connectivity infrastructure it's near?
Absolutely. Yeah. So 2 things there. Use local knowledge. Like when we've done these maps and we present them to county commissioners, we usually get, oh, finally, we can see the reality of broadband in our county. And then when you don't have enough money to solve the whole problem, then you go back to the county commissioners and say, okay, how do we prioritize this? And is it the areas of the highest population density, lowest population density? How do you make those decisions? That's a very local decision about where to put your resources to try to challenge. If your state took the DSL downgrade, then you can just don't even bother with areas that are DSL. Like in Athens County, we don't have to worry about the DSL because the state took the opportunity to downgrade those. But we do have a number of cable modem operators that are overclaiming. They don't have the capacity they claim. So again, in that particular area that we were looking at, it's 4,000 households. And so that became kind of a priority for us. It's also a very impoverished part of our county. And that's how it became a priority for us. But you've got to come up with your own way of parsing that. And based on your state initial proposal, make a decision about, hey, I don't have to worry about that area because it's going to get downgraded anyway.
Related to that, and you might have covered this a bit, has the DSL downgrade status been accepted by NTIA or is it pending?
It was actually proposed by NTIA as one of the standard things a state could choose to do. So I hope there's no pushback from NTIA on what they proposed as a standard mechanism. What has surprised me is how many states have declined to do a DSL downgrade. You see, I'd say half of the states in the Appalachian region are just taking the FCC maps, period.
All right, we have a few more questions here, and I encourage you to continue to send your questions into the chat or the Q&A. These are great, and we'll hold on to them and consider future educational opportunities based on these. Is there a place to go to see who is coordinating efforts in your state? And also, what is the place to go to submit your data?
The first part of that's a really good point. It would be great to have that sort of clearinghouse of who's willing to do this. I've not seen that anywhere. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I haven't seen that anywhere. It would be a great idea to have that as a resource. The second part of that question of the portal, so how do you submit it to the state? That, again, is going to vary state by state. So some states have hired Broadband.money to have their portal. Other states have hired other companies to provide the portal. So again, back to kind of a state-by-state exploration, your state broadband office should be able to give you that information. And one of the things I want to encourage is dialogue with your state broadband offices. They are under mind-boggling amounts of pressure. I think a lot of state broadband leaders were not expecting the level of complexity and scrutiny that they're getting. I think a lot of them thought it was going to be more like a block grant kind of thing, where as long as they met the minimum thresholds, they would be good to go. It's a very arduous process for them. So understand the pressure that they're under, but definitely reach out.
Do state broadband offices have accurate information on tribal areas? Are there differences in requirements in those areas?
The tribal areas, I'm not as familiar with the tribal requirements. I believe it's very similar. One of the biggest issues I've heard in tribal areas is that the location information is not very good. That even in so one of the best things the FCC did was come out with this location fabric where we can all agree there's a location and this is its address. So we don't have all these address confusions, things like that. But one, I understand that has really not worked very well in tribal areas. That the process CostQuest has used to do that, and they've done a pretty decent job with it, and it keeps getting better with the location information, has just not worked well in a lot of tribal areas. I'm not quite sure where it's broken down, but it's definitely a topic that's hot in the tribal communities.
And this is our last question for today, is that we have some folks on the call who might not be applying for BEAD. So why should all communities or any communities get involved in the challenge process, regardless of BEAD or not?
Yeah, you wouldn't need to. I mean, if your community is well enough served that it's not going to be BEAD eligible, yeah, you don't need to be in the challenge process. When I look at my own county, city of Athens, we recently got overbuilt with fiber to the home by Frontier. So we have Frontier, we have Charter. The city of Athens doesn't really need to participate. Now, if the city decided no one else is doing it and we care about the outlying areas, which I know our mayor does, if he sees nobody else is doing it, he might step in and say, well, okay, we'll do it if nobody else is going to do it. So it's really focused on reaching those corners of your counties that otherwise are going to be ignored.
Thanks, Tom. I think we've made it through most of the questions. Are there any closing words for the group today?
Just try to keep your spirits up. This is it is a significant issue, the broadband fatigue, and we just have to try to keep fighting this for a few more months, and then we'll either have won or lost, and there won't be. I'm hoping a lot of states are going to have broadband programs after BEAD is over, because we aren't going to have addressed the whole need. So I encourage you to start thinking about how to advocate for that too. But right now, let's just focus on BEAD and challenge process.
Thanks, Tom. Fighting the good fight.